Did you know that prepping could become illegal literally overnight? It's something that could easily be done by the government at any point in time. So in this video, I'm going to give you some examples as to how prepping can become illegal instantly. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're talking about how prepping can become illegal very quickly. It's something that can be easily done, and it's something we should be concerned about because we know that at some point in time, the powers that be might turn their focus on people like us because we might have more than what we should. And that's something that we have to consider and be aware of as part of the preparedness community. And if you've had more than you should from time to time, then hit the subscribe button below because we need to be aware of our possible fates when it comes to these kind of situations. And prepping becoming illegal is something that could definitely happen, okay? So how is this possible? What makes it possible, and why could this even happen? What's the point? Well, first and foremost, national emergencies and martial law open up a lot of different doors to the sense of being able to take things that aren't necessarily owned by the government. And obviously we've been under a national emergency for decades. I believe there's 37 different declared national emergencies that are still in effect today. So keep that in mind because basically at any point in time, there is enough authority in the executive branch to enact some of these measures, all right? So the United States Defense Production Act of 1950 is a big part of what allows for a lot of these different measures because it basically outlines everything that can be done in the sense of the private sector from the federal government in order to make sure that we stay prepared and ready during any kind of a emergency or possible foreign conflict. And that is something that is the origin of all of this different stuff we're about to talk about, okay? So in the US Defense Production Act, okay, there's a section that's 2072 or section 2072 or section 2072, however you want to say it. But anyway, what it says is that hoarding of designated scarce materials can be considered illegal. And basically what it tries to say is that in order to prevent hoarding, no person shall accumulate materials designated by the president as being scarce or in high demand. So there's a possibility of the president to basically say that something in particular is scarce or in high demand and now is no longer able to be hoarded or stockpiled. There's a lot of different things that could fall under that banner that could be very bad for both you and I. And those limitations are then placed by the president as to what that amount might be. What's considered stockpiling? What's considered hoarding? How do we know how much of what it is that they're talking about? And we're talking about things like food. Would they use poundage or would they use calories? Who knows? Would they use different types of food? Is there an amount of cans you can have, an amount of bags of this, or an amount of boxes of that? That's something that we'd find out when this whole situation occurs. And the same thing can be said about other resources or materials as well. Obviously, things like ammunition or fuel could easily be on that list, especially things that might not be thought about very much. But let's say there's some kind of a nuclear event. Suddenly gas masks and filters and iosat tablets and everything else related to that could easily be marked as being scarce or in high demand, and then suddenly hoarding those items, whatever that number might be, 1 gas mask, 2 gas masks, you tell me. But all those things can become illegal very easily and very quickly. Like I said, the authority's already there. We're under a national emergency. We have been for forever at this point. But also martial law allows for these things to go through rapid fire. So keep that in mind because the penalty for hoarding scarce materials, according to the US Defense Production Act, is up to $10,000 or up to 1 year imprisonment. All right, and obviously if we're under a martial law situation, those courts operate a little bit differently than the courts that we currently have today. So there's a lot of different negative concepts out there surrounding the idea of hoarding, but we all know that preparation involves stockpiling or having extra on hand, and that consideration of being hoarding is designated by the president at that time in that moment based on whatever numbers they decide on. So that's something you need to keep in mind and why this can happen anytime, overnight, whenever. But there's other examples as to why this is something we should really consider, okay? Why this whole thing could be even worse than just that, okay? Which sounds ridiculous, but yes, it can actually get worse, okay? So in 1994, an executive order was signed by Bill Clinton, okay? And in that executive order, some things were designated as being something that could be seized in the sense of private property, okay? And it allowed for the implementation, this executive order did anyway, for the director of this program to be labeled as FEMA, all right? And then FEMA was supposed to work with the National Security Council on implementing and advising any of these different procedures that they're gonna put into place, all right? So, they designated food resources as being any commodities or products that could be ingestible by humans or animals. And that is something that falls under the parameters of what could be seized based on a national emergency or a foreign conflict or whatever it might be that requires resource allocation to be allocated in a way that the government sees fit over whatever it is that you or I may decide it needs to be. So keep that in mind, because in 2012, another executive order was signed by Barack Obama, who basically added commercial water packaged that's potable, basically bottled water, onto that list of food resources. So now we're talking about things that aren't necessarily ingestible in the immediate, but still able to be seized, okay? And water resources themselves were also listed as being any usable water from any source that could be managed is now also available if needed during any kind of a national emergency. So you can see how quickly all these things kind of evolve and how fast everything goes down the road towards anything they want to take, they can if they decide to. There's a lot of different measures in place, and there are examples of this happening even very recently. Back in 2020, in March, there was an executive order signed by President Trump at the time, who basically said they didn't want to allow for hoarding of medical supplies or any resources regarding healthcare. And that was something else that was put out there in the same sense as to what the US Production Act said, or the Defense Production Act, basically that hoarding medical supplies was going to be punishable and fines or imprisonment were on the table for doing so. And those numbers were to be decided by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That is something that we have to keep in mind. We have to remember that these things are real issues that we could face here in the future, and that we should prepare now for these possibilities to exist. And I do want to say thank you to Destiny Troll, one of the subscribers here, for bringing this idea to the forefront and talking to me about it a little bit, so that way I could give you all some more information about this concept, because sometimes the community has some good things that they want to put out there, but they don't have the platform like I do in order to do it. So I appreciate when you give me different ideas and different things to talk about, because it is important for the community to understand how quickly this whole situation could turn illegal, how quickly your stockpile of ammunition could be considered seizable or finable or even imprisonable based on the fact that you have more than what that number is they decide to suddenly write in there. And especially when there's someone who isn't necessarily friendly to the idea of preparation in the sense of stockpiling, hoarding, or having additional, I don't know what it might be, things that utilize ammunition. Those could all be easily listed under hoarding of materials and things that are needed for the defense of the United States. And then suddenly you have a number that's associated with what you are maximally allowed to have. And that is exactly what could happen at any point in time. So be prepared for that situation. And obviously there's some ways to combat this whole thing, and I'm sure all of you are aware of how to maintain OPSEC on a certain level, and people like myself have completely thrown it out the window. But that's okay, because it allows me to give information like this to you so that you can take better care of yourself in case this situation ever arises, okay? So understand, prepping, it's very important. Everyone should do it. But it also could become a crime at any point in time. And it's something that is already there in law, ready to be activated at any moment. And you have to be ready to be in the boat of somebody who may or may not comply with something that is listed in that whole measure. So I wanted to bring this to your attention, and I wanted to say things in a certain way that said them without saying them. So if you have anything else to add about how prepping can become illegal basically overnight, leave it in the comments below. Because this is a reminder. This is just to keep you informed and to keep you on your toes to understand that not everything is just something we can do anytime we want. And at any moment they can say, enough. And when that happens, do you have enough yet? Have you acquired enough? Because acquiring it will definitely be a problem at that point. And having it will take a little bit of creativity to make sure that either nobody's aware of it or that what you have doesn't necessarily represent everything you have. I think I said that just right. So, anything else at all? magicprepper.com, hit me up, let's talk about it. But besides that, that's gonna be it for Magic Prepper.